Yes? Good. Hello, welcome. We're going to start promptly because this is a short session and we have got a lot to talk about. So the start of this story, the start of this citizen engagement project was probably about 18 months ago when a little gang of... Can't hear? Better? Good. Start of the story. I don't need... I have got my outdoor voice, so if you can't hear me, just let me know and I'll put outdoor voice on. Am I very quiet? Really, really, how's that? Oh my God, I'm going to turn into Tina Turner and not careful. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, good, good. So, start of this story. 18 months ago, when a group of chief exec senior folk, always last, my Wales director, everyone, a group of chief exec senior folk from farming organisations, from food organisations, from green NGOs gathered in the heart of the Cotswolds. And the purpose of our gathering was to actually ask ourselves some pretty challenging questions. We had been working collectively on food systems transformation, producing reports, producing research for some of us decades. And we had invested an enormous amount of hope in the National Food Strategy that Henry Dimbleby produced and published in 21. By mid-22, it was absolutely clear that that hope had been, let's be polite, misplaced. And we were not getting the outcomes that we had all hoped for, and in fact, we had all invested in. And that conversation was a pretty straight-talking conversation. We said, we've done all the right things. We do the research, we do the advocacy. Henry was appointed by government. He was of that crowd. And even Henry had not been able to land some pretty straightforward and simple recommendations that he'd set out in that report. We said, what the hell else are we supposed to do? The thing that really provoked me in reflecting on the rationale that government had used to decline the invitation to act, so that they were using the excuse of the consumer. Nobody wants a nanny state. Consumers only really care about cheap food. Cost of living crisis is coming. It's all very complicated. We really can't afford to act on these really complex issues. Maybe at some point in the future, but certainly not now. And what I knew, because FFCC's work has always rooted itself in working with communities, bringing in seldom heard voices, spending time with folk all around the UK, that just was not true. That did not chime with the story that we heard when we worked in all parts of the UK, in urban settings, in rural settings, in farm businesses, in community-centred businesses. It did not ring true. And what I wanted to do, on behalf of all of us in this community, and certainly the group of organisations who were in that room together, was to really take on that toxic narrative that was being perpetuated over and over again as excuses for inaction, and bypass the peddlers of that toxic narrative and start to say, okay, you say you speak for consumers, we're going to speak for citizens, and we're going to go around the country and we're going to ask citizens, so what do we really want from food? And we also wanted to use a set of questions that invited everyone into that conversation. I'm a great fan of citizens' assemblies. I'm a great fan of participatory processes. I supported the Climate Assembly. I supported the People's Plan for Nature, the Nature Assembly. one of my observations is that the choice of question that you invite people in with is really, really critical. And to be really candid, and some of this is about being really straight with ourselves about what's working and what's not working, sometimes we choose questions that are just too bloody complicated. They mean a lot to us because we're in that policy space or that campaigning space all of the time, but it's pretty irrelevant to most of the folk that I hang out with in the pub on a Friday night. So we wanted to frame a question, we wanted to frame a conversation in which everybody could participate. So that simple question, what do we really want from food? Food and its relationship with health, food and farming, food and land use, food and climate, food and nature, food and trade, food and justice. But coming through that doorway of food, we felt pretty confident that everybody we invited would find a way into that conversation, would be able to start and then grow into the conversation as we shared more information with them. So last year, we set off to demonstrate that our hunch, that if we embarked on this approach, we would get some really good responses from citizens, maybe some different responses to the ones that we were expecting. So we set out to do two proof of concepts, one in Birmingham, one in Cambridgeshire. Now, as luck would have it, those are fantastically diverse places, reflecting very different kinds of UK communities. But it was also places where we had good relationships. We had the social capital that we needed to be able to co-design with colleagues in those places, people who would learn fast with us about how to construct the process, what works, what is really engaging. We used the sortition process to bring people into the room. For those of you who don't know, the sortition process is really the gold standard of inviting people into an assembly or a participatory process, because it rigorously selects a proper cross-section of that community. So, for example, in Birmingham, 24,000 invitations went out. And of the people who responded, they were carefully sifted to make sure that the people in the room really did reflect the broadest range of characteristics, of backgrounds, experiences, everything from socioeconomic background, educational background, did you vote Leave, did you vote Remain, do you identify as on the left or on the right, really, really good cross-section of the room. And we also commissioned two expert facilitating organisations, Hopkins Van Mill, TPX Impact, to do the work for us, because we wanted to be absolutely convinced and strong in the methodological rigour that we had deployed for this process. I think this is the point at which I'm going to say run VT, which is apparently a phrase that the young folk over there are not going to understand. We're now going to show you what citizens had to say. Can you roll the film now, please? Oh, you didn't specify audio. With audio.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Right. So my name's Faisal. I have two lovely children, one aged 7 and 10, and a lovely wife, and we live in a nice little house. It's a very, very complex system. I now kind of look at food in a little bit more different way. So when I'm picking up a piece of fruit or a piece of food or whatever it might be from the supermarket, I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, so how much of the profit is going to the farmer? How much of the profit is going to the supermarkets? How was it made?
I'm Steve. I come from Cambridge. I lived in Cambridge for my whole life, or just around it. I don't know really. It's hard. I guess some of the problems are so severe that there does need to be a level of intervention from the government to ensure that people's practices are best for their own health and for the environment.
My name is Nirala Begum. I'm an assistant head teacher in a local grammar school. I'm also a mother of two and a wife to my husband. My son drinks sugary drinks like nobody's business, and I was thinking, where did I go wrong with that?
My name is Susan. I'm a carer and someone who has health issues myself. I think it's very hard to stay healthy if you go into hospital, because the hospital food often contains processed foods, and for me that makes me very ill.
My name is Naz and I'm a minibus driver, father of 5 children, husband, a brother and a son. And my priorities are my family, keeping them healthy and safe. I think all I see now, advertisements, is new fast foods opening up all around Birmingham. And burgers, burgers, burgers.
My name is Sophia and I am a mother of 2 children. Just literally driving in the car, you see a McDonald's or a KFC or something there. Majority of the buildings that have been derelict or pubs that have been derelict are turned into fast food restaurants.
My name is Jodie. I live with my husband, Paul, and little boy, Miles. There was lots of people from different backgrounds, different ages, different nationalities, and everyone came together, and I felt like everyone agreed on the core views. We all felt for the farmer, we all wanted to be a healthy nation, we all wanted the government to provide policies and guidance for the big corporations and distribute the wealth a little bit more fairly.
So we do need the politicians to kind of get on our side. We've got the facts, we've got the case studies, we know where we need the help, we just need the help from you guys.
Well, I hope that we can find a way of feeding the world without damaging the environment so much, and making sure that, you know, we can eat healthy food that gives everybody a better quality of life.
So that's a tiny, tiny glimpse of all of the assets that we've got from those 2 conversations. And I hope you can tell immediately that in conducting this work, we have really paid attention to how we communicate the results of it. So as well as engaging citizens in the conversation, we are absolutely committed and focused on how we use that engagement to advocate really, really effectively for government attention, for government to take food seriously, and to start setting out a policy framework for food systems transformation. Now, I'm going to come back to some of the stats. That gives you a feel for the stories that we have enlivening the work, the research, the evidence, but there's also some data. And I'm going to come back to that in the end. But first of all, I'm going to start with Sarah. Sarah Pullen is the food strategy director.
Food system lead.
Food system
you can make a
lead.
new name, it's fine.
Director, I was going to chuck in director. You can have it, take it. Who has been doing this work in Birmingham for quite some time, but then collaborated with us in this particular project. So does this chime with all of the other work that you've been doing?
I think what's been happening in food systems generally, internationally and across the UK, is that people are finally acting at exactly the same moment. And I think the unifying moment was COVID. Because suddenly people realise that supply chains are really insecure. Like, we have a just-in-time model, and suddenly the people facing the worst inequalities were the ones that weren't getting access to food. And I think the benefit that happened was people united and started coming together around topic areas. And one of those areas was that Birmingham decided to set up a separate food system team so we could really drive forward the food system strategy. which I have here, very revolutionary. And also that researchers and people who were looking into the true citizen voice of what's needed all started doing these sorts of things at the same time. And I think one of the most reassuring things about the FFCC approach has been using that sortition approach. Because the risk of having any type of consultation is you'll only hear from the people who are most motivated, the ones that have the loudest voices, and that's not necessarily representative. But amazingly, the same messages came through from our local approach. We've engaged with like over 800 people in the development of our Birmingham food system strategy. And we've also looked at a huge amount of evidence. And I think what is really clear is that the complexity of the food system is the biggest barrier. And the only way to tackle that is by people who are involved at higher levels, who have the power to influence things like infrastructure and coordination and supporting startups and all that sort of thing. They need to be on side, and you need to have a system approach. So whether that's within local authorities to do with planning policies and tackling food insecurity, or it's at a national level looking at land use frameworks and everything else like that as well. Because in Birmingham, 88% of our population lives in a more deprived area than the national average. So the narrative from the national government would usually be, oh, therefore, price is the most important thing. But it's not. Food insecurity isn't just access to food, it's access to nutritious food. And actually the inequalities that are faced is that people in more deprived areas, first of all, don't have a supermarket within a 15-minute walk. They have convenience stores that have less variety of food and it's more expensive. But actually what could happen is national government and local governments could support innovative action, disruptive business models that increase access to nutritious food, that still pays the farmers a good salary, and it's fair, and it just means that we change how supply chains are structured, but that takes national action. And I think the other areas that we need to think about is how cities, Birmingham has 1.15 million people. That's a huge amount of buying power. What we have is a complete disconnect from any rural area, any farmers. We don't have a clue where to buy local food unless you go online. But that's not right, but we need to have coordinated action to be able to tackle that. And I think if we can get all the people coming together and the government supporting innovative action that can be under the guise of economic growth, it can still achieve all these things. You can support communities, you can support economies, you can support the environment all at the same time, and that's how we're going to achieve action, because it isn't just some charitable aim. This is literally what we need to save our planet and support the people who need it across the nation. So I'm hopeful that we're all on the same hymn sheet at the moment, and that we might be able to get some really innovative policy actions going forwards.
And one of the really lovely things that I think people in our piece of work really appreciated, that you were there, they heard from you. So the opportunity to do something or to invite somebody to do something wasn't to some faceless, distant bureaucrat in Westminster. It was to the person who's got some responsibility and some accountability for what happens right on their doorstep. And that meant a lot to them.
I think that's been really important for our entire approach, is the relationships. Like, too often consultations are based on, oh, how many people filled in a survey, or how many. That's not engaging with people. That's not truly building the relationships. And I think, I mean, my team's been around for about 2.5 years now, and we're only just building the momentum where people will reach out to us and be like, oh, did you know about this community garden that's growing like ethnically diverse crops that actually thrive in like urban UK climates? And that's the sort of innovation and things that have been disconnected before. But the more we can have people working across the system that people can connect to, the better we'll achieve everything we want to do.
Brilliant. Thank you. Dan, I'm going to come to you next. I kind of sneakily said right at the start, we moved away from that kind of glib strapline that politicians often use and businesses often use. We know what our consumers want, and we said we are going to talk to citizens. Now, this is something that the Food Ethics Council has led on, has pioneered and has supported. Just say a little bit more about what you have found it means when you talk to people as citizens, not just as consumers.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Thank you, Sue. I mean, yeah, this comes back to the point that we are trapped in this consumerist cage, and as Sue says, we talk to people, in businesses, talk to the average consumer, as you said, an average person doesn't exist for starters, but also we are not consumers. We are consumers who do, sorry, we are people who consume, and we need to consume better, we need to buy better, absolutely. But crucially, we are people, first and foremost. We talk about food citizens. We're very mindful that citizens, the language of citizenship can be problematic. I don't want to go there too much now about as being co-opted, but actually if we think of ourselves as people or as food citizens, then actually we can influence and shape the food system in so many ways. Hence why this work is critically important. And it's that notion of, you know, we've been trying to promote, I guess, people to think differently. When you hear the word consumer, and I saw it on a video earlier at the first session this morning, you know, we are consumers was on the screen. And it makes me jar every time I hear or see the word. It's that the reason is that it traps us. If we are helpless consumers at the end of a long chain, I'll leave Guy to talk about the role of farming in that chain, if there is such a thing. But if we are helpless consumers, then yeah, we feel like we're one of 8 billion plus people. What difference does it make? There's too many, you know, for those that do have options, not everyone does. For those that do, then as a consumer, you think, what can I do? Am I fortunate enough to be able to buy organic or whatever my proxy is for good food? If for many of us, many people can't afford to have access to good food. So how can we change the system around us? Connect with our power. And when we think of ourselves as food citizens, we realize actually we've got huge potential power, and actually we need to trust people. That's what, you know, I guess back to the start of this process that Sue was talking about, the premise behind this, or the default is that we can't trust people. You ask them what they want, they'll tell you they want the world. You look in the shopping baskets for most people, and that will be very different. But that's the starting premise for that, is that people don't care, or that they're lazy, or that they're liars. And I don't think that's the case at all. We are inherently, all of us, we do care. There are just loads of barriers in the way, and we're not given the opportunity to participate. So hence, the national conversation about food is a critically important thing for me to, and for us to support and be involved in, as it gives more voice to the people, to the public, in ways that, you know, in lots of traditional dialogues and systems don't exist. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think one of the most moving things about this process for me has been, I don't know if it was, well, you're perhaps getting used to it now, but we hear so much about how angry and polarised people are all of the time. We're fed that trope over and over again through media, through social media. And yet, in the room with this cross-section of people in Birmingham and in Cambridgeshire, people were kind, they were thoughtful, they were generous, they were respectful of each other. They were so willing to engage in the complicated and messy issues. They were more than willing to think about choices and trade-offs and implications when you start bringing the food system into view. And they loved being asked, and they loved being involved, and they want to stay involved. A co-benefit, if you like, perhaps even the main benefit of what we're doing, is that we're telling a better story of ourselves into the world. We're showing how much more of ourselves we can be when the challenges in front of us are so great. I'm coming to you now, Guy. You have just led the most brilliant movement-building initiative for some time, Get Fair About Farming. I'm sorry if you were you were torn between the two sessions that Guy was billed at, but we're going to hear a bit about it from Guy here right now, because this is about creating movements. This is about bringing people together to create a movement for change based on a deeper understanding of how things are at the moment and how things could be. And your campaign, I'm going to say this because I don't think you can, or you won't. You and Riverford stepped up and led a campaign for which you didn't really have any skin in that game. You do not sell to supermarkets, but you have spearheaded a campaign that's achieved so many signatures that it will now be debated in Parliament. And the people that I speak to about it are so grateful that you have stepped up and taken that leadership on their behalf, because so many farmers feel so desperately excluded from those conversations, but they don't feel that they have a voice, and you do. So anyway, tell us about it.
Yeah, so this was the Get Fair About Farming campaign, which we started in September. But it kind of goes back a long way. I love farming. I farmed all my life. I never wanted to do anything else. I was in wellies as soon as I could walk. And I just love the industry, despite not massively identifying with a lot of my neighbours. And I'm just totally gutted to see that industry on its knees. And this has been going on throughout my working life, but I would say it was particularly accelerated in the last couple of years. And yeah, so we did launch this campaign, and I felt quite uncomfortable about it, because I thought, who am I talking? I haven't sold to a supermarket for 20 years. It was one of the happiest days of my life when I sent my last little gem lettuce off to them. But the reason that I can speak is because I'm quite good at speaking, and because I don't have any skin in the game. Farmers are just terrified of supermarkets. You can't get anyone to tell you. I mean, the one farmer we got to spoke on record, you know, had to be blacked out. There was a farmer locally that was put out of business by losing a supermarket contract. I put a journalist onto him, and he wouldn't talk. He left the industry, still wouldn't talk about it. I just don't, you know, I don't know. There's this sort of air of intimidation that is quite extraordinary, really. Well, if you ever go into a supermarket buyer's office, you understand it. I mean, it is total intimidation. Anyway, so we started this campaign, and I wish I could say it happened spontaneously, but it didn't. A lot of effort went into it behind the scenes, and a lot of very professional marketeers that I spend most of my life deriding, I'm afraid. But they did a damn good job of this, and that's what really gave it the momentum to carry on, I think. But the other thing that really gave it the momentum was fundamentally, I think, its truth. You know, I mean, if you say you're going to buy 10,000 little gem lettuce in week 34, surely you should buy 10,000 little gem lettuce. And if not, if the clouds come over and people don't buy as many lettuce, that you decide you only want 60,000 and the farmer has to plough. I mean, to me, to most people, that just seems absolutely patently the way the world should work. So I think these campaigns get a sort of momentum when you are pushing a fundamental truth that has not been really exposed or talked about before. Well, it had been, but not sufficiently. Is that enough for starters?
Just say a little bit too about the number of signatories you've got and where they've come from, because they're not all farmers, are they?
No, I mean, it's wonderful to have that unified across the industry, organic, not organic, whatever. You know, almost everybody, I would say, got behind it. So there were a lot of farming ones, but a lot of general public ones. And I just get stopped in the street in a way that I never did before by people saying thank you for what you've done. It's extraordinarily hard. People know this is bullshit, and it needs to be, you know, flagged up. And I think they're grateful when it happens. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Before we break out into conversation and questions, I'm going to share with you some of the stats, because I know stories are so important, but actually the numbers matter too. And these numbers, I think, are particularly interesting because, as I said at the start, we worked with incredibly professional and reputable organizations and polling companies. And when they presented these results back to us, they said they had never seen such consistency of response across demographics, across backgrounds, as they had for this particular topic, which is pretty extraordinary. Go on.
I just thought I've probably been incredibly arrogant, assuming that everybody knows what this campaign is about. But so I'm probably, according to a survey we did, 49% of fruit and vegetable growers think they'll be out of business next year. I mean, it's absolutely devastating. I suspect it's not quite as bad across other sectors of agriculture. And the overriding reason for that, well, three reasons, you know, climate change, added risk in cropping uncertainty about government policy following Brexit, but probably the leading one was treatment by supermarket buyers. And I would say the statistic that stands out to me in my working lifetime, as far as I can gather from the sums, it's very hard to get really accurate information, but for fruit and veg, when I started in the late 80s, about 38 pence in the pound went back to the grower. It varied according to the crop, and but that's down to about 25 pence in a pound now. So we would get, if the food prices stayed the same in the shops, but farmers were paid the proportion that they were when I started, we'd all be getting 50% more, and I think you wouldn't hear many moaning farmers. The rest of it has been absorbed by supermarkets. And I just do not understand why it seems to be a fundamental bloody Newtonian law that the primary producer always gets screwed. And yeah, that's what the campaign is really about.
And just say you made some really simple asks. Just say what they were.
You buy what you say you'd buy. You pay what you said you'd pay. You pay on time. And you commit to long-term trading relationships with your suppliers, which don't seem like, well, perhaps the last one is a bigger one. And those are sort of drawn from a suppliers charter, which I wrote with some of the Riverford suppliers when Riverford became employee-owned, in an attempt to ensure that Riverford never behaved the way supermarket buyers behave towards me. Because, there have been times over the last 15 years when I've got a sniff of it, normally an arrogant young man getting a bit big in his boot switch, and that's typically, well, in the days when I met supermarket buyers, that's typically what they were. I mean, it was totally toxic. Yeah, anyway, I'll stop there.
No. That's why we love you, Guy. So simple messages, but simple messages expressing a truth that most of us would have taken for granted. And that's what we found over and over again when we were talking to citizens. When we explained the intricacies, the interdependencies of the food system to them in really simple and straightforward terms, the relationship of food with their health and their well-being, where food was coming from, who was farming it, how it was being farmed, what farmers were having to contend with in producing it. Also, the challenges that farming has given rise to in terms of climate and nature. So it's not all a rosy picture, but also about questions around trade and land use. When we presented that, what people often call a complicated story to citizens in those sorts of straightforward terms, they were very often surprised, and they were very often appalled and furious. Phrases like, is this being done in my name? Is my poverty being weaponized to excuse a profoundly dysfunctional food system because people are saying we have to have the crap food for the poor people? Outrageous, not in my name. As you saw from the film, a broad cross-section of people want exactly the same things. Let me tell you some of the numbers. The public want government to support farmers to transition to more sustainable methods. 71% want the government to incentivize environmentally friendly farming and food production, and that sentiment is held right across demographic groups and political leanings. The majority of the public back policies that will protect farmers. 88% of Britons think it is really important that farmers are paid fairly for their work. Just coming back to some of the more meta questions, nobody wants a nanny state. Government doesn't need to act because they can leave it to Tesco's, the famous Tim Lang catchphrase, Tesco will fix the food system, government doesn't need to act. Citizens said they're not talking about nanny state. They expect government to act. They recognise that these are big and complex issues and they can't fix them when they're running around their supermarket late on a Friday night in the rain trying to work out how they're going to feed their family for a week. They cannot intervene in a big and complex system as individual citizens. It's big and it's complex, and it needs the people with the resources and the power to do the interventions on their behalf. Government 101, protect your citizens. And they want government to act, they expect government to act. One of the lovely phrases was, the only people that talk about nanny states are the people who actually go out and employ nannies for their own children. Yes, yes. They also had very, very clear views about healthy food and about junk food. So we showed them the policies in the food strategy, policies from Food Foundation, policies from Food Ethics Councils. We showed them a whole range of reports that experts have been producing both in the UK and around the world with really carefully, well thought through recommendations. We showed them that where there was commonality, where there was some difference. They talked about the trade-offs, and they just said, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? So that's the question that we are going to be continuing to ask. So this is about movement building. This whole conference is about movement building. We have been incredibly fortunate to have received a very generous grant for us to continue this work through this year. So we at FFCC, on behalf of all of our family and our community, are all in to amplify the citizens' voice throughout this year and beyond. This is a critical year. It is an election year at some point. It is an election year. And we want the incoming government to know that citizens want food to be centre stage in the policy environment. And only do they want it, they expect it. And they have some really simple and straightforward ideas about what government can do, what business can do, what local government, local actors can do to just get stuff done. Right, so let's start taking some questions because we're running out of time. Person there with a hand, I can't even see faces. Excellent. Burgundy jumper, that's all I can see. Burgundy sleeve is all I can see.
Thank you so much for laying this out. It's really exciting to hear this work is happening. I'm wondering, in terms of the results you're seeing from the consumer voice work, what response you're getting from the politicians? And I ask this because we've done something similar on just climate action, where we do local polling, and that data is just not accepted. They just refuse to accept that because it doesn't fit their narrative. So I'm quite interested to hear how the politicians are responding to the data that you're getting together and the stories.
Very good question. And of course, not all politicians are the same. For some politicians who really want permission to act on these issues, this is a godsend, and they're really grateful for it. And they're really grateful to have this evidence to shore up the arguments they're making within their parties. And actually, it's across the political parties. We're not the only voice they're hearing. So the more successful we are, the stronger the opposing lobbyists' voices become. And so we are really, really conscious that as we demonstrate collectively a view from citizens that supports this kind of action, there are other voices popping in round the back to say, oh yes, but you know what we see in our supermarket, or our products are flying off the shelves. So we are super, super conscious that we need to really sharpen our elbows in our advocacy. We have to deploy the methods and the tactics that lobbyists have been using to such great effect for the last 40 years. And that's why we are spending some of that grant on advocacy expertise. But also it's a bit about numbers, and it's a bit about occupying the narrative space, changing the way we talk about it, giving all of us consistent materials and assets that we can all deploy every time any of us get asked these questions, get challenged on these issues. So we can all be saying, but look, in our area, this is what these citizens are saying. Oh, look, when these folk were asked, this is what they were saying. And you might say that, but look what these folk are saying over here. So we will build a huge and unstoppable drumbeat to take on those other voices that unnerve politicians and help them realize that this is where the prizes are. This is where the political prizes are. This is where the social and ecological prizes are. Next question. Sorry, I can rant for England on this, and I'm going to try and... Should we take the person there, and then we'll come over here?
Oh, well, I'm Harriet. Has anybody, I'm sure they have, but I just think to avoid all that, to boycott those voices, those rich lobbyists, how about linking up small mixed farms, which are the best for the environment, say with a school in Birmingham, and they could provide the food, or you could have like, what do you call it? You have a community place where you grow food, then you have a community kitchen. And then on the internet, you just say, right, tonight we're doing shepherd's pie, blah, blah, blah. Because having been a junk food junkie in the past, I just know that actually, when you've got a kid, it's just really easy to go and buy oven-ready meals. And you might say, because you feel you should, oh yeah, no, I want healthy food. But when it comes to it, you know, time is important and all that sort of stuff. So has anybody done that? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of farming cooperatives and shortening the supply chain so you can go direct to consumers is definitely something we are actively, anybody out there in the Midlands, please get in touch. But the main challenge is storage, distribution hubs, logistics. And all of those things add so much to the costs. Like the cost to produce some food, that's amazing. It doesn't have to cost that much. Doing it in a really regenerative way, really ecologically good way isn't that much more expensive than other farming methods. What adds to those costs is the coordinating it. And then you get into the centre of the city and you've got the clean air zone charges. So you've got a small van, not economically environmentally friendly, so you have to pay more. So the challenge we have is that when you do want to connect to consumers within cities, we need to have that coordinated approach with distribution hubs, logistics, sharing the load between different farmers and sharing the load between different consumers. And that takes investment, but the challenge is that nationally you have these very powerful voices who say, oh no, but the supermarkets, no one's ever the villain of their own story. They're saying, we're giving cheap food to people. But that is completely disarming. All the people that need to connect are being disarmed by this approach that intentionally keeps us all separate. But we need to tackle that. And in my experience, the reason people have processed food isn't because they don't want to eat healthy, it's because they haven't got enough money coming in, they don't have equipment, they can't afford pans, they can't afford ingredients, they haven't got time, they've got to have 3 jobs. There's all these other challenges. It's not about skills and it isn't about knowledge. It's about so many other things that government also has control of.
And I think that's brilliant. And what's really important is that this project is about changing the narrative. There are loads of people doing brilliant work. Guys supporting a project, you're doing the work. There's people, loads of you in this room are already doing that work. It's our job to change the narrative so that work can take off, so that work can escalate, so people feel less like they're battling against, you know, an unstoppable force. People, that you can all do your work more easily because the ground is rolled more effectively for you. I'm going to take one more question and then I'm going to ask my panel to wrap up with big asks for the year. I'm going to take person on the front. Sorry, there's lots of questions, but we're happy to chat afterwards.
Firstly, I think that all food ought to be healthy. We shouldn't be growing stuff that isn't. And if we just sorted all of that out, then you wouldn't have to make a choice, would you? But I'm really impressed by the way you gave your information to your participants. And how do we get that information to the government so that they can make sustainable choices?
So the government has the information. That was almost the point. We showed citizens the reports that governments have had and have declined to act on. And so we were confronting their argument that says we can't possibly act because our citizens or consumers don't want it. So that's what we were challenging. We were confronting that trope. We don't have to, I can talk to you about that afterwards, but we won't have time for now. But in the last few minutes, I'm sorry, I'm getting signals. I want to give my panel a last chance. So, starting with you, Dan, Guy, and Sarah, if this project works in the way that we hope and dream it will, and, you know, frankly, we are resourced in more than my wildest dreams to do, what would be the real big outcome that we will have delivered by the end of this year?
Excuse me. I mean, for me, it's what you talked about. It's changing laying the groundwork, if you like, to enable collective flourishing of all the amazing things that are happening here. And maybe that's not a 1-year ask, that's probably a 5-year ask. But in the next year, it's giving that platform to people to participate in what you're doing, and for others in the room to be able to use that, tap into that, use that power to demonstrate that and argue against the myths of that nanny state is bad and all the rest of it. So it just feels like a brilliant opportunity, especially as it gets rolled out across different parts of the UK beyond just England, which is really, really important too.
Oh, sorry, I thought the change you wanted, the different, change I would like to see is honesty. I mean, most of the people currently in power, in business and in government claim to be followers of Adam Smith in one way or another, the father of modern economics. Anyway, one of his principles of the free market was that it only works if you've got perfect knowledge. And when you've got Tesco's putting a intensively reared chicken that lived in about that much space with a picture of a chicken walking around in a pasture, I mean, I'm just going to say again, it is just complete bullshit. I mean, I can't, when they create a farm, Willow Farms, which doesn't exist, so they don't actually have to be committed to any of that, that's bullshit as well. It's actually lying. I can't understand why it's legal. It's certainly immoral, and if it isn't illegal now, I would like the government to change the law so it is, that it is actually illegal to deceive people.
I'll be brief because I know they're asking it. I think having a food system group at government level that looks at all the policies in a coordinated way would be the most transformational thing to do. Because most of the policies and issues that we've got are all treated in silo, and then you never get coordinated action. But if we could get the coordinated version of what we require at government level, I think we would actually start seeing quite a lot of change in many, many places.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. You can find ways of getting in touch with us in the mix.
Thank you to Sue, because I really do think this is a really important bit of work. So.
Stand up to show your faces, everyone you can't see. This is